Hello and welcome to the Evidence-Based Exercise Rehabilitation and Sport Performance channel. This channel is for the healthcare movement professional looking to incorporate applied research concepts into their current practice setting. Today's topic, the PST process. The objectives of this discussion are to reflect on your current thought process utilizing constructing exercise programming, introduce you to the PST learning approach, and provide a means by which you can extract evidence-based principles from peer-reviewed research that can be applied to your practice. In our previous video entitled Complexity Gaps, we discussed the thought process that could be used in your day-to-day practice that is purposeful, measurable, and outside the restraints of the traditional plug-and-play model. We'll be applying this process to the application of peer-reviewed literature in order to extract applied movement or exercise principles that you can incorporate into your setting. This will result in examining movement science through a different lens and allows for additional programming options. This thought process I'm referring to is termed metacognition, which means thinking how to think. Traditionally, most professionals are taught a very generic thought process when it comes to programming. A process that stems from memorization of programming parameters or exercises is very limiting and does not allow for a deeper understanding of why success or failure took place. Without this level of understanding, how can modifications and improvements be made? Here at the channel, we'll be using what's referred to as a PST approach. P stands for principles, S for strategies, and T for techniques. This type of learning approach enables the professional to transform evidence-based principles into techniques that can be used with your patients and/or clients. Now let's have a closer look at each one of these components. Our P stands for principle. In this model, a principle is evidence-based knowledge that is well established and cannot be refuted. This does not include any type of theory. Strategies are the vehicle that we use to apply the evidence-based principle to the body. And then we come to techniques. This is the actual exercise or treatment and its corresponding parameters that are performed. When we first begin to program, we learn things by observing and memorizing what was performed and then trying to replicate them in similar situations. When the same results aren't replicated, the programmer is then left scratching their head because they have no thought process to reflect on in which to make adjustments. We're going to apply the PST process to the following outcome goal. So let's say we're working with an individual and you would like to increase dynamic postural stability of the right knee during the loading phase or weight-bearing phase of gait. First of all, we have to ask ourselves, how are we measuring success? How will we know if the programming that we implemented worked or not? Now we need to ask ourselves, how would we apply this PST thought process to help us construct our programming? Now let's walk through an example. Let's say you just finished reading an article by Seta et al. Entitled The Impact of Reactive Neuromuscular Training on Falling in Parkinson's Disease Patients. One of the primary evidence-based principles discussed in the article states, altered afferent information into the CNS can change feed-forward and feedback motor control systems. This is a great example of an evidence-based principle. It cannot be refuted. Now, the degree of change can be argued, but not the statement itself. Now that we have our principle, how can we use this statement to create change in a patient or client? We need a vehicle that allows us to apply it to the body. In this example or study, the authors use reactive neuromuscular training to alter peripheral afferent input in order to create a greater reflexive response to reduce fall risk. Moving on to techniques. So what techniques were used? Techniques involve specific parameters of the programming. These would align with your programming goals. In this final step, we now ask ourselves, how could R&T be used to improve a specific task, such as stair climbing, walking, or sit to stand? Basically, the technique is what you give the patient or client. This is your prescribed programming or treatment. It's important that this be measurable in order to reassess its effectiveness of the actual strategy that's utilized. When we reflect on this thought process, what we're really doing is taking more time to understand why we're getting a particular outcome in order to adapt and find the simplest path to achieving our goals. Putting this thought process into action takes time and practice. I'd like to applaud you for sticking it out this long. You have just walked away with a new evidence-based option you can use to improve dynamic stabilization of your patients and clients, and that is add in more afferent input. As with any program construction, make sure the addition of this strategy is appropriate and you have a way of measuring its effectiveness. If you enjoyed the content and would like to see more, please subscribe and join our community. From here, we'll begin to explore peer-reviewed literature using the PST process. We'll pick out the evidence-based truths and discuss clinical applications. Thanks again for hanging out with us today. See you in the next video.